Hey everyone, welcome back to The Long Dark. Today we're going to be doing a tier list about The Long Dark, in particular The Long Dark's clothing and how it ranks from late game, very good stuff, to mid game, good, early game, fair, and then things you would usually use on the first days and things that I would never use. Now, just like the region tier list, this is going to go off of my opinion and obviously some stats about the clothing itself. And I do understand for this tier list that you could maybe find in lower difficulties a bearskin coat maybe towards the first days if you spawn in like Ash Canyon. But we're going to be doing this on how the coat and clothing ranks by itself. Meaning, is it very good? Is it good? Is it late game or is it mid game? So, with that out of the way, let's get into the Long Dark clothing tier list. All right. So here on the list, we do have a cotton toque. I got to be straight up. This is going to be a first day's item. I don't really ever seek this out. If I do find it, it's usually within the first days, and I'll keep it. But past the first days, yeah, I usually do find something else like a wool toque or a wool scarf or something that is better than this item. So this item is a first day's item. It's really just better than nothing, is what it is. Next here on the list, we have the balaclava. Now that's going to go right up here to the late game. This is a very, very good item. Probably one of the best at wear type of clothing you could have in the game. The decay rate for this one I know is much or slightly lower than a wool toque, and it can only be worn on the outer layer of your clothing. So you can't have two of them on you, which is a shame because this item is really good. But nonetheless, it is a really good item, and it's definitely one that I find myself finishing a run of like 200 days with this item on. Obviously, it's not an interloper, unfortunately, but in Stalker and lower, this item is on me from the late game onward. All right, next here we have a pretty useless item, in my opinion. These are the ski boots, and they're going to go right into never use. I don't think I have ever used these boots one time because the mobility it takes away from you is so extreme. It's just never worth it. In Interloper, they do not spawn, and I think that's a good thing because I would still not wear them. I honestly probably wouldn't even wear them if I was in the early game. That's how much I think they are not the greatest. They're very warm, don't get me wrong, but the mobility it takes away from you is it's a sin pretty much. And I just don't think I don't think it's worth it. All right, next coming in here hot, we got the cotton scarf. That's gonna go. Actually, this is probably gonna go into never use because it's basically just like wearing nothing. This cotton scarf is probably the least giving of temperature in the game out of any of the clothing. It still does, it is something. It definitely still is something, but it's among the least beneficial things to wear, in my opinion. It just it's right down there with the driving gloves and the sports socks. It's just not really worth it at all, in my opinion. Next, we have the baseball hat. This is another never use. It does give back a little more warmth than the cotton scarf, surprisingly, but it's definitely not something I would hold on to. In fact, I would most likely just tear this and the cotton scarf up for some cloth, so I can repair other things. So this is going to be another never use item. All right, next here we have the leather shoes. The leather shoes I'm gonna have to put at never use, because usually I tear these down for cured leather to repair other things. If I find it in the first days, I'll wear them. I mean, kind of the same with everything in the never use category, but in general, I never really use the shoes, so these are gonna go in never use. All right, next here we have the cargo pants, it looks like. I think I'm gonna probably go ahead and put the cargo pants here at early game, meaning they are a fair piece of clothing. I don't think they're great. They're better than jeans, that's for sure. But other than that, I mean, there's a lot of pants that rank higher on the list than just cargo pants. So for now, I do think cargo pants are gonna go in early game. I'll wear them, but I probably won't wear them beyond the early game. All right, next here we have the Mackinac jacket. This is going to go right up towards mid game and good quality. The reason Mackinac isn't getting a late game is because there is a lot of things on this list that rank above the Mackinac. But the Mackinac is definitely a good mid game item that I would wear to help me get to the late game. The stats are great. The weight is okay, and it's something I like to use, usually. It's fairly easy to find when you're exploring the world. Don't get me wrong, they're not common or anything, but There are a few spawn points you can check, and sometimes you find this, but overall, it's a good jacket. All right, next we have the best socks in the game, climbing socks. These socks are going to go right up to very good. It's definitely a late game item. I have found these socks in my first days, obviously, but in general, it is a late game item, and it's a very good quality. The warmest socks in the game, like I said, and very durable. Anytime I give up a run, these socks are probably on me towards day 100, 200. I have them on all the time in the late game, so these are a very good item. All right, next we have a little bit of a hot take, I would say, in my opinion. These are the combat boots. Now, the combat boots aren't that great. I just have to say that right off the bat. The warmth is okay. The mobility isn't great. I'm gonna have to say it's a never use for me. I hardly use them. Sometimes I'll pick them up if I'm on the first days, but I'll drop them soon after for something else. And honestly, I think they're more useful just being torn down for cured leather to repair other things on the list here. So the combat boots are gonna rank as never used because I just really never use them. All right, next here we have combat pants. Now, combat pants are a very, very good type of pants. I'm actually probably now this one, okay, this one there's a bit of a hot take on this one, right? Because if you're playing Stalker or below, there are definitely pants that are better than combat pants. But if you're playing Interloper, these are among the best pants you can get along with the deerskin pants. But I think I'm really going to put the combat pants at mid game. It might seem a little hot, but there are much better things here on the list than this. And this is kind of a Stalker item for mid game. All right. Next here we have the warmest sweater possibly in the game. The Cauchon sweater, I could be pronouncing that wrong, but this is going to go right up towards late game. Very good. This sweater is probably the rarest sweater to find. I definitely have a few runs where I search the entire world out and I only find one of these sweaters. Obviously, it's not Interloper, it's just Stalker and below, but very rare to find. But if you do find them, very, very good. The warmth bonus is insane for a sweater. Protection is good as well, and the weight is good as well. So this is going to be a late game, very good item. All right, next we have the deerskin boots. The deerskin boots, and I'm going to go ahead and put them at late game very good. They are among the best boots in the game, on Interloper that is. Stalker and below, they could rank as mid-game good condition, but I think just in general, when I see deerskin boots, I think of a late game very good item. So that is where the deerskin boots will stay. All right, next we have almost its counterpart here, the deerskin pants. Now, the deerskin pants, I am probably also going to put in very good late game, especially because I play Interloper all the time. I always have these two things in tandem, working together to help me keep warm. It's a late game item. It's very good, and I think that's where it's going to stay. All right, next we have the down vest. That's just going to be right into first days. No real use for the down vest. It's pretty warm, but there's just better clothing items than this. So first days is where it's going to sit. All right, next we have another first days item, the dress shirt. That's going to go, like I said, in the first days along with the down vest. Yeah, usually I just wear it for like 2 days and then harvest it. It's really nothing else to be said there about it. Next, we have one of my favorite pieces of clothing in the game, the Expedition Parka, and it's such a shame this does not spawn in on Interloper. It's going to go very good late game. This is only available on Stalker and below, but still, it's a very, very good item. I believe it's almost up there with the wolfskin coat. In terms of warmth, it's a very, very warm item for how light it is. You put one on your inner and outer slots, and you can be walking around like a true champion on day 100, even maybe warming up during the day outside. So this is going to be a very good late game item. All right, next we have the Fisherman's Sweater. I really do like this sweater, and I think I'm going to put it right there at mid game. This is honestly a very good item, but just the fact that there's something better, it's going to be bumped down a category. Now, usually what happens if I don't find another Cowichan sweater is I will just use a fisherman's sweater. So it does almost vouch for itself to be in late game, but usually when I think of this sweater, I think of a kind of a mid-game good sweater, not as good as the Cowichan, but still pretty good. So mid-game is where it's going to sit. All right. Next, we have the fleece cowl. This thing, I really hardly ever come across it. I think it's a pretty rare spawn. I could be wrong, but I just never find it. I never find it. So I'm almost tempted to put it in never use because it's just elusive to me. I don't know if I'm doing something wrong or something, but hardly come across this thing. I've probably only worn it 3 times. And yeah, that's really all there is to say about this item. All right, next we have the fleece mittens. Fleece mittens, I think, are going to go early game. It's a fair item. I usually find myself wearing those a long time, at least until the mid or late game. Warmth is pretty good. All the stats are decent for what you would expect for fleece mittens. Nothing really additional to add on to that. All right, next we have the best gloves in the game, the gauntlets. Now, these are going to go in late game. You do not spawn an interloper, unfortunately, but in Stalker, they are a very good late game item. There's really nothing like it. So, not much to be said about that. Just a very solid all the way through warmth, protection. All the stats are very good, and it is a late game item. All right, next we have the hoodie. The hoodie's going to be a first days type of thing. I usually don't wear it into the early game, and I don't think it's a fair piece of clothing. I just think it's a first days type of thing to help you get off your feet. All right, next we have the improvised head and hand wraps. Both of these are going to be kind of a first days type of thing. Now, obviously, it depends on your situation. You could be wearing this into the early game or maybe even mid game. To me, when I think of improvised anything, it's going to be first days just to help you get off your feet. All right, next we have probably my favorite pair of boots in the game. These are the insulated boots. They're going to go right up to late game, very good. Now, these have a very, very high warmth for their weight. It's so easy to move around in them. Something that I always love to have on my late game character. When I retire a run, I'm usually wearing these boots. So these boots are going to go to late game, a very, very good piece of clothing. All right, coming in next, we have the jeans. The jeans, I think, are going to be a fair. Now, I know they could definitely be in first days, but on Stalker and even Interloper too, you tend to have jeans on for a lot of the early game. So I just think that it's going to stay in the fair early game category. They're not exceptional, obviously there's better things above that, but for now, it's going to be fair early game clothing. Next, we have the light shell. The light shell's all right. I hardly really use it, to be honest. I hardly use it, but when I do use it, it's definitely early game. It's no ski jacket, don't get me wrong. And it's definitely no simple parka, but it's a fair piece of clothing. It gets the job done. It's better than nothing. But like I said, I hardly use it, so it's going to be an early game type of item. All right, next it looks like we have the Mariner's pea coat. This coat is very good, but I just don't think it's worth the wait. It's not a never use. I'm going to put it at mid game because I'm constantly swapping this out with other things. In general, it's a mid game good item. All right, next we have an absolute classic here, the bearskin coat. That's going to rocket right up to late game, very good. The warmest piece of clothing in the long dark by far, the bearskin coat. Not much can be said about this one, and the protection's fantastic, the warmth is fantastic, everything is fantastic except for the mobility, which does bite into your ability to run quite a bit. But besides that, it's a stellar item, and it's definitely a late game thing. All right, next it looks like we have the military coat. I gotta be honest, I never use the military coat. I never do. I never find it. I don't know if it's something I said to it or something, but I just never find it. I think it's good on temperature. I wouldn't know because I never use it. So, that's going to be a never use for myself there. Next, we have the Moose Loke. Now, this one's going to be a bit of a disappointment for a lot of you, all right? But I never use it. I never use it. I don't know. I just think it's a waste of a moose hide to make this. I would much rather do the moose hide satchel. And while we're here, let's just go ahead and put the moose hide satchel up to late game. I'll get to that in a second. But yeah, it's just a waste of a moose hide. You spend 10 days curing it and you make it into a pretty mid jacket. And it's just not for me. But on the other hand, its counterpart, I think, the moose hide satchel, yeah, that's great. Anything that adds weight to your inventory is an automatic plus. Yeah, and this thing does the job. It can get you out of some trouble. So late game, a very good item indeed. All right, next, I hope I'm not pronouncing this one wrong. The mucklucks, I believe. Now these shoes are kind of interesting because they give you a ton of mobility. It's a very, very good item, but you know what? It's something that I hardly use. Okay, well, I will say I have used them in these last three pieces of clothing, so I'm gonna put them probably up at mid game. It's a good item. It's not something I would wear into the late game, but it's something I would wear to get to the late game. All right, next we have the Exploration Parka. This one is probably going to be in the mid game. It's a very warm piece of clothing, but it's definitely something again that would get me from the mid game to the late game. All right, here comes the plaid shirt. The plaid shirt's definitely going to be a first days type of thing. Not really looking to hold on to this one for too long, especially because you can find other warm things to go in its slot. So for now, yeah, it's a first days item for sure. All right, next we have the rabbit skin hat. That's going to go right up to late game. Very good. Anything you can craft is usually in the very good late game category. There might be one or two things that don't meet that rule exactly, but the rabbit skin hat definitely meets it. It's a very good item. It's very good, very warm, pretty light, and it's a late game item. All right, next we have its counterpart, rabbit skin mittens. Those are also very, very warm gloves. Late game item, very good. All around, all the stats are great, and that's exactly what it is. It's a late game item. All right, next here we have the running shoes. The running shoes are just going to go right into first days. I usually don't like to hold on to these ones for too long because there's a lot better things out there. Not much else to be said. It's a first days item for sure. Enough to get you off your feet, right? All right, next we have the simple parka. Simple parka is going to probably go, it's a debate between early game and mid game. Probably gonna put it in early game. It has better stats than all of these clothing do, but I just never really find it, and when I do find it, I tend to think of it as an early game, just kind of fair item, you know? It's pretty mid-tier. It's just fair. Like, I'll never hold on to it for that long. Next, we have the ski gloves. The ski gloves are another piece of clothing that I hardly really come across. I would have to put this in a mid-game, kind of good area. They're not the warmest gloves ever, and I certainly don't come across them all the time. But when I do, I just think they're good. You know, I think they're above fair, basically. So they're going to get a mid-game good rating. Next, we have the ski jacket. Now, the ski jacket is probably going to go right into mid-game, no doubt about it. It's not late game because, again, there's better things than it, but it definitely can carry you out of tough situations. In even early game, if you get to find that in your first days, you are probably going to be set in terms of warmth and protection for a lot of days to come. So this is definitely a mid-game good item. All right, next we have the warmest pants in the game. Snow pants are going to go right up to late game. Unfortunately, they do not spawn in Interloper, but they are such a great item for Stalker and below. Always on my late game kit, and if I, again, retire a run, I always have snow pants on. Next, we have the sports socks. These are going to go right into first days. Honestly, they can go probably into early game. I usually just try to replace the sports socks as quick as I can because the amount of temperature it gives back is pretty minimal. Is pretty minimal. So I wouldn't really try to carry this on to the early, mid, or late game by any means. All right, next we have the sports vest. It's gonna probably end up just like its counterpart, the other vest in first days. I'm usually just trying to replace it. Don't really find it that often. But when I do find it, it's probably out of the inventory within the first few days. All right, next we have this red sweater. I'm actually blanking on its name, but I know it so well because it spawns an interloper, and interloper is basically all I play. But this sweater, I would have to put it probably at early game. It's a fair item, you know? It's pretty common, I would say. And it spawns an interloper, which is great, but it's definitely an early game item. I do try to replace it by the mid and late game with something else, but it gets the job done at the early game stage. All right, next we have the t-shirt. This is going to be just like its other plaid shirt. The shoes and the socks, it's going to be in the first days category. Like those, I'm really just trying to replace them within the first few days. It's no point in hanging onto a short sleeve shirt in the middle of a blizzard. It's not happening, I don't think. All right, next we have the thermal underwear. Thermal underwear. In Interloper, it's a late game item because it's the highest of its kind, but I'm probably going to put it at a mid game good tier just because we have long johns coming up, and those are very good. It's a mid game item. It's good. On Interloper, it's great. Next, we have the heavy wool sweater. This one is definitely good. This is probably going to go in mid game, but it's super heavy as the name implies. So usually I try to change this out with something else. Sometimes I'll even downgrade because it does take away a bit of your mobility. All right, next here we have the thin wool sweater. Now, the thin wool sweater, again, just like the thermal underwear, is going to go in mid game. If it wasn't the best interloper clothing, I'm tempted to probably bump it down towards early game. But because it's interloper, just like the thermal underwear, I probably would have put it at late game. But, you know, it's just like the underwear. It spawns in on the lower difficulties. So it's going to stay at a mid game good item. All right, next we have trail boots. I got to be honest, I hardly use trail boots. But if I do, it's probably within the first days because, like the other things, I'm always trying to replace it with something else. Work boots, I like to replace them with because these trail boots, they're good. They have decent protection, decent warmth, but it's just not something I would take into the early, mid, and late game. All right, next we have the Urban Parka. This thing is very warm. It's a very warm parka. This is gonna go probably mid-game. Not gonna go late game because there's better things than it. So it's a solid mid-game good item. All right, next we have the Windbreaker. The Windbreaker is a little challenging to rank, I think, just because I hardly find this one. Of the times I do find it, it's a fair item. It's fair. I mean, I'm tempted just to bump it down to first days, but because I never really find it, I usually just play with it around the early game if I do find it. So it's a fair item. Not good, not bad. It's just fair. All right, next we have the wolf skin coat. Wolf skin coat's going to go mid game. Usually, if you're shooting wolves, you'll make yourself a wolf skin coat before you make a bear skin coat. This is a mid game item. It's good. Not great. It's definitely just good. Next, we have the wool ear wrap. This probably is going to be it's gonna be a late game item. I was thinking of putting it at mid game just because it has some things you can replace it with, but it definitely can go as very good because it's a very good item for that accessory slot. It is. All right, next we have the long johns, the counterpart of the thermal underwear. Those are gonna go right into very good. It's definitely a late game item. I have a hard time trying to find that on Stalker. I don't know why. Maybe it just has it out against me, but whatever it is, it's a great item. It really is. You can find it. It's definitely a late game one. Next, we have the wool mittens. Wool mittens, I'm gonna have to put that right up here at mid game. Wool mittens are definitely underrated, I think. They're definitely a good pair of gloves. I wouldn't put them at late game because obviously there's better things in it. And I wouldn't put it at early game either because they're kind of hard to find. Mid game suits it well. All right, next we have this other plaid shirt. I'm not exactly sure what it's called. Actually, I think it's probably the cotton shirt, something like that. But either way, this is going to be an early game. The only reason I'm not putting it in the first days is because this one's a little warmer than the plaid shirt. It's made of wool, so obviously it's going to be warmer. It's going to get more heavy when it's wet. But it's definitely something, if I have it, I'll take it into the early game with me for sure. A fair piece of clothing. Next, we have wool socks. Wool socks are going to go right up to mid game. On Interloper, they are the best socks you can have. So for Interloper, they would go to late game. But for now, not much to say. They're socks, right? It's a good item. All right, we have here the wool toque. That's going to go right up to late game. One of my favorite hats by far. Definitely gets the job done. It's trusty. Whenever I have a run, I'm ready to retire. It's definitely on me at that time. So it's going to be a very good late game item. Next, we have the work boots. Now, the work boots, I gotta say, probably the best early game item you can find, to be honest. But I'm probably gonna put work boots to debate between mid game or early game. I'm gonna put them at early game. I'm gonna put them at early game. Now, these are gonna be one of the rare instances where, well, I shouldn't even say that. It's a good item. It's a good item. The work boots are a good item, but I think I'm just gonna put them in the early game category just because it's rather common to find one of these. Rather common, and I usually find myself having a pair by the first week of game time. So, yeah, they're gonna be going into the early game category. All right, next here we have the work gloves. These gloves are pretty meh. I gotta say, pretty meh. They're gonna go in fair because usually I just like to harvest them for cured leather. That's really about it. The stats are decent, but that's really all there is to say about the work gloves. Next, we have the work pants. The work pants gonna be probably a mid game for me because work pants only spawn in on Stalker and below, I believe. So Interloper don't really get a chance to play around with them. But it's a mid game item. It's good. I rarely find this, but when I do find it, I do consider it a good item. All right, next we have, I don't really remember the name of this, probably like the long scarf or something. Either way, it looks like this, and it's probably gonna get, it's a debate between early game and mid game. I'm probably gonna say it's a mid game item. Definitely. I hardly find this item too, but when I do find it, it comes in handy. Definitely a solid item all around. And it looks pretty cool on the character as well, so it's a mid-game good item. Next is the wool scarf. This is going to go right into early game. It's usually as good as the cotton toque, but it has a little, I believe the waterproof and protection might be a little higher than the cotton toque. But either way, I mean, both of these items are pretty low on the list just because you find them and then you move on. Nothing really fancy about them. All right, and lastly here, we have the driving gloves. These driving gloves are gonna be going to never use because I hardly use them. The only time I do use them is to tear them down. There are a pair of other things here on the list, but driving gloves, yeah, not a great item. I never use them. All right, so there we have it. I do apologize if I mispronounced any of the clothing names or forgot the names of them. It just kind of happens. But, this is pretty fun. This is pretty fun. There's a lot of good clothing in The Long Dark. I love a game with good variety, and The Long Dark is definitely one of those games. Now, if you wanna play this tier list for yourself, you certainly can. It's the Long Dark clothing tier list, just as you see here. I do just want to note that we are missing a few items here, such as the crampons or the new items that came out with the DLC content, like the aviator cap. Those were not in here because it was a tier list, again, not made by me. So just beware of that if you want to play for yourself. All right. So if you guys made it this far, as always, thank you all so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. And I hope to see you all in the next episode.